I'm honored to introduce my friend and colleague for the last 24 years, Steve O'Donoghue, as this year's recipient of the 2011 Carl Towley Award, JEA's highest award, named after the first chief executive of the Journalism Education Association. In 1959, Mr. Towley's yearbook class surprised him when they dedicated the yearbook to him. And here's how the dedication read. You can find this on the JEA website. To one who teaches the fundamentals of civic responsibility. To one who practices these fundamentals through service to the community. To one who perfects these fundamentals by living them daily. To one who believes, as Mr. Towley wrote, the greatest achievement I can make to my classes is to help them develop a social consciousness, which to me is a sensitive awareness of others, their needs, hopes, fears, and accomplishments, all of which may lead to mutual understanding and respect. The same might be said of Steve O'Donoghue. You know, I could tell you a lot of funny stories about Steve O'Donoghue. Steve's really a funny guy. He kids a lot. There are always a lot of laughs around him. And there's a reason why his friends, behind his back and never to his face, call him the leprechaun. And it's not just because he's Irish. He really does have a twinkle in his eyes. And as much as Steve jokes, with most everyone, there's a serious side to his nature that's driven by a passion for social justice and the rights of scholastic journalism teachers and students. So I will tell you a serious story about Steve and two JEA conventions in 1988 and 1990. And while he's achieved much more in his work on behalf of scholastic journalism, his biggest impact has been around the work he's done with equity and social justice. At the 1998 convention in Washington, D.C., Steve brought 7 students from the Media Academy at Fremont High School in Oakland, all African-American kids, like most of the kids at the school. He tells the story of how his students, some of them leaving Oakland for the first time in their lives, looked around at the convention and said, "There's nobody here who looks like me." And they were right. In those days, we saw few students or teachers of color at our conventions. Steve never forgot what those kids said. 2 years later at the fall convention, in his address as that year's Dow Jones Teacher of the Year, he exhorted the association to address the small number of advisors and of advisors of color and minority students attending the conventions, and to reach out to them and to make them a part of our work and to better reflect the growing diversity in the country. After a few faltering first steps, and with Steve's help as the first chair of the Multicultural Committee, now Commission, the association created the first Outreach Academy, designed to help advisors with high minority populations and few resources. It has grown and changed over the years, but it remains focused on the goal of embracing diversity in our newsrooms and helping new advisors in high minority schools. Since he retired nearly 10 years ago, he hasn't slowed down and reaching out to new advisors in a variety of ways. In fact, he seems to be doing more than ever in the Bay Area, in Sacramento, in Los Angeles, and nationally with outreach. In the early part of the last decade, he created the California Scholastic Journalism Initiative to support advisors in high minority population schools, either without a journalism program or one that had languished. Together in 2005, he and I created a mentor program for new California advisors that in 2007 was adopted by JEA and is now expanded into the association's largest effort in its history. Steve may be retired from the classroom, But this dynamic, energetic, and passionate journalism educator just keeps going. He sees no reason to stop now. He's making too much a difference in the lives of teachers and students around the country. He's having too much fun, and his new issues just keep cropping up. Over a career that has spanned more than 40 years, Steve has been a major force in moving the association and scholastic journalism to champion the rights of all teachers and students, no matter their color, resources, or background. In 2011, JEA is a better, more representative, culturally aware association because of the work of Steve O'Donoghue and those he's influenced and inspired. For his efforts on behalf of all of us, he is a worthy recipient of JEA's highest honor, the Carl Towley Award. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve O'Donoghue.
Even though I was in a classroom for many years, I actually get nervous doing this. So if I mess up, bear with me. I understand they're going to edit the tape later. I want to thank my former best friend, Nick Ferentinos. I love those remarks, wherever that guy is. He's great. Nick is emblematic of, I think, this whole organization and what is best about it. And I'm sure that all of you here have friends like Nick in JEA and in scholastic journalism. And that's what makes us so unique, is this tight bond. We meet a couple times a year in foreign cities, foreign from California anyway, and people pick up conversations they left off months before. They work hard for days for kids, other people's kids, right? And they make this incredible organization fly. And I started making a list of all the people that it influenced me and I wanted to thank, but I'd probably get kicked off of here. It would take too long. There's half the people in this room that I know personally, I'm sure, that have in some way or another influenced me. So if I don't recognize you by name today, it's in my heart, I recognize you every day. Now, when Nick disclosed to me that he and some others were sneaking behind my back to award me this incredible honor, I started thinking about what I'd been doing for all these years in the classroom and out. And some of you may know, I've told this story before, that I kind of fell into this by accident. I got drafted. The school I was at, we got a new principal, and he had been an Army officer and a police officer, which may give you a hint as to his management style. He hated unions, and I was a union rep. So after about a year of that, I decided it was time for me to move, and I applied for a job at another school. And those days, I was a social studies teacher. And when I applied, they listened to me politely, and then they mentioned that they had this journalism position open. I said, that's very nice, and tell me about this social studies position. Well, we have this journalism position open. So if I wanted to escape my current situation, I had to do journalism. And like many teachers, I'm sure many in this room, my first year was misery. I wanted to quit. I didn't know what pica was. I didn't know printing jargon. The kids all hated me because I wasn't the teacher who had been there for 27 years ahead of me. It was misery. But one day, and I don't remember who it was now, out of the blue, someone showed up my room and dragged me to a JEA Northern California Saturday workshop in Lodi, as in stuck in again. And there, I discovered that I was sitting in classroom with students who knew way more than I did, way more conversant in journalism, and that there were teachers sitting in there besides myself with the students, and that this was kind of a joint learning experience. And the presenters were kind enough to share with me their curriculum, in mimeograph form, of course, and give me their phone numbers, and put me on their mailing lists. In those days, that actually involved a stamp and an envelope, so that I could read their newspapers and share my newspaper with them. And that's really how all of this started, is someone showed up and dragged me into the wonderful world of journalism. So in effect, I was one of those early journalism mentees. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it's journalism education that actually pioneered, for most of education, mentorships. And it was never phrased in that term, it was never expressed in that way, but that's what we have been doing for almost a century. Now, to be honest, looking back is somewhat depressing in light of the current deplorable state of education. I realize that the profession I loved and thrived in so long is currently beset by budget cuts, standardized testing mania, and attacks on the selfless educators who by know-nothings who myopically argue that a teacher and everything they do can be melted down to a data point and processed through a test instrument that will sum up their entire contribution to education in children. I felt a certain amount of resentment that these so-called reformers, some of whom I had looked to as role models before, were blaming teachers for the effects of poverty and racism. I deplored that our value of education for its own sake and learning was being diminished, and there was a lack of appreciation for what we used to call liberal education, with no political pun intended, and that some of the people that I saw, in my view, ever since Brown v. Board education, have been doing everything they can to tear down what is good about public education for all, were now in the driver's seat. I saw educators, as my peers, especially in journalism education, under enormous threat. And it's my feeling that it didn't have to be this way, that we shouldn't live in a world where school boards that don't like the facts of history just take the facts of history out of the curriculum. On the flight here, I kind of revived myself by reading an article that I recommend to all of you in the September issue of Smithsonian Magazine. It's called A+ for Finland. And in this article, I read of a system where teachers are valued, where decisions about the education of children are made by educators, not by bean counters. I learned of a system where teachers are so valued by society that candidates turn down the possibility of being a doctor or a lawyer or other professionals to teach, and that they are compensated in like manner. I learned that there's a system that abhors standardized tests and refuses to rank schools or students or teachers against each other, and that somehow this system is the best system that we can measure in the world today. We used to be the best. America was the best. And I believe we can be again, but we have some work to do. I think that as an entity, as educators and as journalism educators, we're going to have to step up our game. Although we belong to a profession that's just a sliver of the total teaching population, we are a key component. We are the model many teachers are looking for. Journalism education didn't just pioneer mentoring. We have been on the cutting edge of education in America for almost a century. We have been the leaders by example through decades of change and growth inside of and outside of education. Here are just some of the elements that we take for granted in journalism education that reformers say good education should include. And you don't need to subscribe to Ed Week to find these. All you have to do is look around this room. Journalism educators, from this partial list, address multiple learning styles in their classroom. We use a variety of instructional strategies and resources to respond to students' diverse needs. We individualize instruction. Now, of course, we do all this for a not very unselfish reason. We have a paper to get out, a yearbook to produce, a broadcast to get on the air. We modify instruction to adjust for student needs. Maybe you don't write so good. Maybe you can be our photographer. Group work is second nature to us. Just look around this convention. We pioneered school-to-career connections. Who brings professionals into their classrooms every day? We have always connected to students' prior knowledge, life experience, and interests. And in fact, we encourage them to write about it. We have always presented learning experiences that promote autonomy, interaction, and choice. We can't run a classroom any other way. We always promote self-directed, reflective learning for our students. Sometimes we call this a tear down when we critique the paper. We interrelate ideas and information within and across subject matter areas. That is, we are interdisciplinary. We cover everything. We were the first to use technology, and Nick is the living example, to make subject matter accessible to students. We just called it desktop publishing. We collect and use multiple sources of information to assess student learning, and we teach students to do the same, because that's inherent to journalism. You have to have attribution. We use the results of assessments to guide instruction. We just call them critiques from NSBA or CSBA. We promote social development and group responsibility, and all you have to do is look around these halls in this convention and see how well we do it. Personal responsibility is our mantra, and every edition of every newspaper, yearbook, website, lit mag, or zine we put out reinforces it, because we tell kids this is your publication. Most of all, we are the living embodiment of collaboration and how effective it is as a teaching tool. We are the model and the precursor for real education reform. But change will not arrive without our taking some action. We need to start speaking up to the larger education community about what we do. We need to share with other educators what we do and demonstrate to them how putting education in the hands of students is more effective than standardized testing. We need to be more activist-oriented. We need to lift our voice. I'm not proposing anything new, actually. Nick told you a little bit about Carl Towley, and I found out a little about him myself when I heard about this award. Towley established commissions, planned programs, strengthened cooperative efforts with other scholastic journalism organizations, and created projects to help journalism students and their advisors develop journalistic skills. He chaired a commission on the status of journalism and planned a series of articles in education journals slanted to interest administrators. He discovered that students weren't going into journalism careers. He wrote letters to hundreds of schools all over the country, lobbying them to take action. We need to emulate Carl Towley. We need to spread the word of our profession, its precepts, and how it works, and its value, not just for our students, but for all students. And I think that we should start today. Thank you very much.